All right guys, in this video we are going to be taking this muddy, potentially disease-ridden water from this creek, and with primitive methods only, we're going to make it crystal clear, taste great, safe to drink, with no boiling required. Let's take a look. All right, so this looks like a pretty good place. So I've got a stream that's fairly muddy, kind of silty. So the banks on this creek are fairly steep, but I've got a place here where it's kind of sloped back a little bit. So I'm just gonna come off of this, I don't know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet or so, and try to find a place where there's not a lot of big roots coming off trees. Should be able to get away with it right here. I'm probably gonna run into some roots, but we'll give it a try. But I'm just gonna dig a hole straight down and let the earth filter that water. So I know I'm gonna get flack for this video because what I'm gonna present here goes contrary to what our modern society has conditioned us to believe. And that's that every source of wild water out there is a seething pool of cryptosporidium, giardia, bacteria, and other nasties that can make us sick. But people have been drinking water straight from the creeks or from the ground for tens of thousands of years. It's only in the last couple decades or so that we've been taught that any raw water that's not filtered or treated is unsafe to drink. Personally, I think that's just flat out ridiculous. I spend a lot of time in the mountains at relatively high elevations, and very rarely do I carry water with me. Water's heavy, and at those places, in those high elevations, I can find crystal clear, spring-fed or glacial melt creeks, and I feel very comfortable just dipping right out of those creeks and drinking straight from the creek. Or sometimes we'll go to high elevation alpine lakes and drinking from those lakes where the glacial melt is filtering through the rocks into that lake. Those things are very, very safe. But in a situation like this, we've got a creek that's flowing through here. It's flowing through the lowlands. It's relatively muddy. It's definitely not something that I want to drink straight out of the creek. And there's a couple of things that you want to absolutely avoid. One of them is anywhere that people are living along the creek, because oftentimes there can be seepage from septic systems that gets into the water bodies. Anywhere that there's livestock grazing, so I know that there are cattle up there, and anywhere that there are aquatic or semi-aquatic mammals that are living in the water. There's some raccoon tracks right up here, and those are one of the species that can harbor and spread things like giardia and cryptosporidium. So in this type of situation, I definitely want to either boil or somehow filter or treat this water to make it safe to drink. Now, one of the best ways that I know to do that without boiling is to dig a coyote well. All right, so I'm down probably 16 inches or so, and I can see that there's water seeping into the bottom. I'm well below the water table right here. So one last thing I'm gonna do is just I'm going to smooth out these sides so that there's not so much loose pieces of mud and dirt. Get some of that sludge out of the bottom. Pack down this stuff on the side so it's not falling in there. All right, so water is already seeping into the hole. It's already starting to fill up. Probably take, I don't know, maybe an hour or 2 hours or so to fill up. And then we're gonna come back. I'll dip some water out of here, pour it into a clear glass so that you can see the clarity of the water. Then we're gonna bail all the water out, let it fill up again, and then we're gonna compare the clarity of the first dip versus the second. We'll do it again, and then each time we bail this thing out, let it fill up again, that water is just gonna get more and more clear. All right, so while we're waiting on this original well to fill up, I want to talk a little bit about what I've got going on here. This is an experimental thing. I've never tried this before, but it's a lined well. I had some cedar bark lying around, and so I went ahead and just dug my well as usual, just like I did this one. And then I took this hole and I lined it with cedar bark, and then I took some saplings that are growing nearby, made rings out of them, put those rings in there, which then expanded and are holding the cedar bark in place. So I think that lining the well like this is just going to help keep the water cleaner, because the only place that the water is contacting any mud is at the bottom. And so I think that as we're dipping water out of this thing, any kind of agitation that we get in the water, it's not going to stir up as much silt as it would in an open hole like this. But like I said, this is experimental. We're just going to have to see how it works. All right, so it's been about 2 hours or so since we dug this hole, and the water level is almost to the stream level over here. It's probably maybe 2 inches or so below. So what we're going to do is bail all this water out, and we're going to let this hole refill before we get our drinking water out of there. But before we do that, I want to pull a little bit of water out of this hole and pour it into this glass so that we can see how the clarity changes each time we bail this water out and let it refill. All right, so we've got our first draw out of this well. We've got a little glass. It's really not too bad. It's definitely off color. There's definitely some floaties in there, but it's really not as bad as I thought it would be. So we're gonna go ahead and bail this out, and the next time that we draw water out of this well, it should be much clearer than what we've got right here. Just gonna go ahead and bail all of this out. All right, so we've got it all bailed out. Now we'll just wait a couple more hours, let it fill back up. We'll come back, we'll draw a little bit more water out of there and see how it's changed. All right, so it's been another couple hours. Our well is full again. And again, we have kind of a little bit of a scum line on top. So I'm just gonna very gently ease this can down in there and try to lift out some of that stuff, and then we'll take a second drawing off of this. All right, so I've got the majority of that stuff off that was floating off the top, so I'm just going to ease this down in there, start drawing off the top of this water. So this is the first one, this is the second one. I think I'd rather drink this one. All right, so before going back out there and checking on our wells, I wanted to show you a slightly more refined version. So I'm right here behind my house. I wanted to just show you where we get all of our drinking water. And here you go. It's basically a hole in the ground. This is a surface well. It was dug in the 50s. It's about 20 feet deep. And this is it. This is where we get all of our drinking water. There's no filtration. There's no any kind of treatment at all. It's just straight water, straight from the ground. And so I could open this thing up if I needed to and dip, you know, perfectly good drinkable water right out of the ground here. Now you can see that there's actually some tree roots in here from these balsam poplar that kind of infiltrate through the bricks. And I'll come in here every now and then and just break those off, so that they don't get too big and break the bricks apart. But people have been using hand-dug surface wells like this for thousands of years, and they work just as good today as they did way back then. Let's go check on our wells back in the woods. Lock this thing up so a little cheering doesn't fall in there. All right, looks like we've got plenty of water in these things. It's got just the slightest off color. You can see the difference between, this is the first draw before it, when it first filled up, and this is after. I think I bailed it out 3 times and then let it set overnight. This is the 4th time it's filled up. So just a very slight tinge, but not bad at all. Tastes like creek water. Doesn't taste bad at all. There's a slight off flavor to it, but not bad at all. Nothing like it would be if you were to dip it straight out of that thing, which I would never do. I'd never drink out of that creek right there. Is this 100% safe? No, but neither is your tap water. In fact, roughly 1 million people a year get sick from drinking just that. All right, let's take a look at the well that we did with the liner in it, see if there's any difference there. Again, I'm just gonna dip some of the stuff off the top. That looks like tap water right there. Man, that's good looking water. So I don't know if you can see the difference between, so this is our open mud-sided well and this is the lined well. And there's a big difference between even these two, but then massive, massive difference between the open well first draw and this. So, I mean, holding this up, this water that came out of the lined well here, I mean, I don't know that I could tell any difference between this and tap water. Just because water is clear does not mean that it's safe. Now, personally, I have zero reservations about drinking water filtered in this way, but of course, if you want to be 100% risk-free, boiling is always your safest bet. So let's give it a try. Very, very clean flavor. I can definitely taste the cedar bark, but I don't taste any kind of muddy creek flavor or anything like that. I've just got kind of that very mild cedar bark taste. But this thing actually worked really, really well. I'm happy that I tried it. All right, so let's talk about how these two wells performed. The one over here that's just simply a hole in the ground worked pretty good. It's I feel very confident that it's filtering out all the pathogens, but the water does still have kind of an off muddy flavor to it. It's very easy to build, it's quick to build, and it works fast. Now the one that I've got right here is basically the exact same thing, but instead of leaving the sides open, I lined it with bark. And the water that I'm getting out of this is absolutely crystal clear. I can't tell any difference between the water that I'm getting here and the water that comes out of my tap at the house. And so in a long-term wilderness living or survival situation where you don't have access to those high elevation springs or creeks or alpine lakes where you have to produce your own potable drinking water, this right here is going to be a great way to do that, because you can do this pretty much anywhere, even in areas where you're working with sandy soils where oftentimes when you dig a hole, the sides will cave in. But if you line that with something, even if it's a simple basket with some grass on the outside, you're going to be able to keep that sand on the outside from falling in. You're going to let that water seep into your well. It's probably going to be a good idea to bail it out a couple of times, get rid of any of that silt or anything that you've stirred up during the construction of the well, let it sit overnight, come back the next day, and you're going to be drawing perfectly good, safe, great tasting, crystal clear water. So there's one last thing I want to mention about these wells, and that is it's very important to protect these things from surface contamination. And so if you're going to be relying on this for your water, you're definitely going to want to cover it with something tight enough so that things like mice can't get in there and poop in your water, because nobody likes to drink mouse poop. Very nice. Cheers.